Okay. I think we should start. What a pleasure this evening to introduce Mark Wigley. I can't think that there are many people here who need a great deal of introduction to Mark and to Mark's work. I've even stopped resenting the fact that he's called Mark, especially when you had to put up with Campbell. Anyway, Mark is Dean of the Graduate School of Architecture at Columbia, has a distinguished bibliography of works on Derrida, the holding of the Deconstructivist exhibition and the text, the work on white walls, design addresses, on Constant, and actually an incredible number of journal articles. You keep picking up a journal and it's always another essay by Mark. So he's always been extraordinarily productive. Before being Dean at Columbia, he was at Princeton, and before being there was in New Zealand, since when we've also got Mark Campbell and The Hobbit. It's always a very great pleasure to have Mark. He's always been extremely close and sympathetic to the school, and now he's decided to step down from being dean at Columbia. An act of unusual sanity. One might wish that the practice, frankly, was more widespread. And I hope he returns to as productive life as he has before embarking on the insanity of being dean. For the AA, he has always been, how can I put it, a co-conspirator, an absolute ally, and above all, our friend. Thank you.
Thanks. Super nice to be here. Always to be in this room. I think there are two rooms in the world in which it's really easy to be an idiot, and this is one of them. And the other one is in the school in New York. And those two rooms are somehow linked. So when you're in those rooms, it would be wise to try to not be stupid. But the rooms make it very difficult because almost everybody's spoken in the room. So the room has basically listened to every single lecture. Imagine a room that has heard more lectures than Mark Cousins. It would seem impossible, but it's true. And has opinions about it. So I, with great trepidation, launch and with excitement, launch again another talk in this room. It's lovely to be here. And I want to talk about the architecture of radio, because I've already spoken as if we more or less understand what it means to be in this room. And so I think there will be a series of propositions tonight, right? The first will be, we have no idea what it is to be in this room at all, not even the beginning of an idea. And the fact that almost all the surfaces in this room have been painted white is the first sign of the nervousness that I'm talking about. But already in the sentence I just gave you, that all the surfaces in this room have been painted white, it's as if there was a room before it was painted white. But you probably would agree that it became a room when the white arrived, which means that all of us are sharing about 1 millimeter bubble of plastic, of vinyl paint. And we're not supposed to touch it. That's why it's white, so that we don't touch it. And the things that we touch are a little bit different. I think you're sitting on plastic seats and then a sort of carpet. And you're sort of floating in this bubble. And you know as little about this room as you know about an aircraft when you're in mid-flight. So basically you're in this metal cigarette traveling at whatever it is, 400 miles an hour, at 30,000 feet. Any one of those facts would be sufficient to make you go mad, which is why sane people don't get into airplanes. Another group of people is highly medicated. Another group of people adjust their chemistry in the flight. Then there's a group that's worried, their knuckles are white, and they just know that the plane will crash at some point, and every small sound indicates that. Then there is a group that's unbelievably relaxed and happy, and I'm a member of that group. And it took me quite a while to realize that the group that believes the least in flight is that last group, the one that is, we have so anesthetized ourselves to the situation that we just feel pure joy of disconnection. But no one, when shown technical drawings of what makes flight happen, they do a section and they show you the wind and they say the pressure goes down and therefore the plane goes up. Only about 5% of people go like, well, then it makes perfect sense that a big piece of metal with me inside it should go up into the air. So what happens is that during the flight, you're in this room, you very much know it's a room, you have a sort of a sense of the dimension of this room, but you don't believe in the room at all. And a number of devices are provided for you to help you forget about the room, which includes a woman treating you like a baby, makes you feel like you're in a kind of cot, and your maximum obligation is chicken or beef. So basically you've got 6 hours building up to the decision, chicken or beef. The music is playing like this, there's alcohol, there's bad television. Tom Cruise himself personally responsible for guiding people across the Atlantic in yet another Neanderthal performance. And the whole point is nobody in the room, believes in what's happening to the room, and the evidence for that is when the plane lands, the people who were sure that this was going to be their last flight burst into applause. And thinking, well, not today, next time, sort of thing. So the reason I say all of that is that it's perfectly possible to be in a room and not believe in it. And we might go even further and say, perhaps you only would think of yourself as being in a room exactly in the moment that you don't believe in it. In other words, exactly, we use the word room just to mark, as it were, a thing we don't understand, what it is to be in a room. So I would say we really have no idea what it means to be in this room. Rooms are therefore rooms, and collections of rooms, like buildings, might be something that we just don't know about. On the other hand, we seem to be quite articulate about the space of radio. And this room is entirely filled with radio. You all have radios in your pocket. You probably use this radio in your telephone to wake you up in the morning. And it may well be the first thing you look at. I mean, you may look at that before you look at the person that you supposedly love. You certainly will touch your phone with more affection than will you show to most human beings. You'll quickly check your messages. And maybe for many of you, the last thing you look at before you sleep is that very same device. And many of you will actually have the device in the bed with you, closer to you than the person that you supposedly love. The rest of you will have the phone at an arm's distance. Some will have it beyond the arm's distance on the principle that you need to walk to the phone in order to not fall back asleep. But one of the implications of that is that your conscious life is coterminous with your telephone. In other words, consciousness and the phone's ability to connect you to a wider world, is what it is to be awake. And anyway, of course, if you read your emails just before you go to sleep, it's very likely that they went with you. And maybe that's why you read them just before you sleep, so that you kind of take them with you to digest them in the unconscious. So your ordinary life, just as somebody who has a cell phone, is considerably stranger than most science fiction, or to say it another way, a huge proportion of science fiction has been devoted to this moment where the human consciousness becomes electronic, and more than that, becomes in the kind of invisible world of radiation. But that's just your cell phone. There are millions of radio signals in this room, millions of them. Some of them are coming from a long way away, from satellites orbiting above you, literally watching and listening to you. A little bit closer, maybe from a television tower, or a radio, FM, AM, a little bit closer again. Little cell phone towers, Wi-Fi routers, there are probably several in this room, all of them broadcasting on multiple channels. In fact, the way a router works now is to broadcast on 7 or 8 at the same time. Remote controls, appliances, headsets, keyboards and mice, down to the micro transmissions from your smart cards, which get thinner and thinner. And of course, as you know, almost everything has an RFID tag on it, which is a proto-radio. It's a radio. It becomes a radio when it's energized. So we could say that almost every object in your world has a radio on it, and every object is somehow broadcasting. But not just that, every object has been thought of in the world of radio, built, fabricated, monitored, and so on. So the world of objects and the world of radio have somehow become together, which is funny really, because if you think what it is that's essential about radio is that it doesn't care about objects, it just goes right through them, right? So you could say radio is the least interested in architecture of anything you know, right? Any speech by an architect and radio just went right on through. So that's a strange situation in which we can't even imagine objects now, and what is an object without radio, and can't even produce them, let alone think about them. And yet that thing without which the object cannot appear couldn't care less about the object. And maybe the fact that it doesn't care is the source of its sort of fertility in relationship to the world of objects. But that world, that space of radio is much more clearly understood, and the space of the social networks and the friends, and that space is much more clearly defined. So you're basically in what appears to be a very simple space, a room, which is filled with multiple spaces from multiple radio technologies, infinitely more complex than this room, but potentially more understood than the room. In other words, the invisible architecture you occupy may be more easily understood. So I want to talk about radio, like the thing you can't see. But to do that, we also have to think about what else is not visible in this room. It's not just radio that's not clear to you. So to kind of figure out the relationship between rooms and radio, if architecture has rooms, we would need to keep an eye on what else you can't see. And of course, the main figure for me in this will be this guy, Buckminster Fuller, who you see suspended within a bunch of pipes in the garden of the Museum of Modern Art in 1959, being an animal in every sense. And you could, since there are some similarities between architects and humans, not many, there are visual similarities, but other than that, almost nothing. You could ask why. Why is he up there? Like, what's he doing up there, showing you his body, more of his body than you would normally see of an architect. You see even the underside of his shoes. You could, if we could improve the resolution, see up his nostrils. Or wouldn't you want to do that, by the way? Because the more important you are as an architect, the more closely you are photographed. The moment that you become famous is the moment that the size of your head on the cover of El Croquis is bigger than your head, which means somebody reading El Croquis feels an intimacy with you like they've never felt with anybody before, as they gaze into your follicles. And presumably superstardom would be that you only 3 or 4 follicles are in the image. But then you open the El Croquis and you go into the brain of the architect, literally. This person that you know so affectionately, and you are with them, again, as if you were literally sleeping with them, which is why you will always call them by their first name, right? Because, of course, you're so intimate with not Le Corbusier, Corb, not Rem at Coalhouse, Rem, etc., etc., etc. Getting back to the problem of having too many people with the same first name. So, what is it that's really super invisible? Well, this is an image of a relatively ordinary building. This is not a fancy building. This is just the HVAC system, plumbing, electricity, air, water, etc. of a regular building. You're just not seeing you're not seeing what you would call the room. So this is what's behind what you think the room is. And even the room you're in now is full of all this stuff as well. And if you zoom in, you can see it just keeps sort of going. And every now and then it sort of turns a corner and enters the room. Water, gas, electricity, and information flow inside the walls, the floors, and the ceilings of almost every building, crisscrossing basements, running across rooftops. There's a complex, interconnected net of tubes that support every space, from the largest waste pipe down to the thinnest wires. So if you really kind of count tubes, it'll never end. As a teacher, you could just say to a young architect, well, why don't you just count the number of tubes in this room? And then when you finish that, we'll get on to the next assignment. And 7 or 8 years later, the person will come back with a number. But the whole point is, of course, that these tubes are not allowed to enter the space. They're not allowed into the room. They're like servants, right? They have to bring you something very discreetly, but very discreetly disappear, even before you notice them. And they should lurk like a servant in a space that's not quite in the room, not quite outside the room, just at, sort of at the threshold, preferably totally invisible. A pipe can enter a room, but only if it's concealed. It can only enter in disguise, or it has to change its dress. Of course, you can deal with the problem by suspending the ceiling or raising the floor and just shrinking the apparent dimension of the room so that all the spaghetti disappears. Pipes have to be always close to us, yet super unseen and super unheard. No evidence of flow is allowed anywhere. No rustle, no gurgle, no whoosh, no hum, no shudder, no click or thud. It's unbelievably small noise that you can use to completely destabilize somebody's presence in the room. Right? So if you're in a room and just like after half an hour there's a sort of a sound, for example, you're totally uncertain and destabilized for a very long period of time. Now, if it doesn't repeat, you can imagine that you didn't hear it, which is actually easy to do. But if it just happens one more time, then you're done for life, right? Because 10 years later, it still could, as it were, return. So it's unacceptable. Now, of course, sometimes the pipes are allowed in. Like, how could you wash your hands without there being a pipe entering the room? But actually, when it enters the room, it has to have a little building on it, made of chrome and design. So it's sort of saying, I'm not a pipe, right? This is not a pipe. This is design. And this fitting is meant to reinforce the room, not the pipe. So basically, it tries to turn the pipe into a piece of the room rather than the other way around. Another huge effort is made to hide all the little electrical cords that feed our ever-expanding array of equipment and devices. How many billion white cords have been bought so that we can say we live in a wireless world? Because the iPhone, of course, doesn't really last more than a few hours, so you have to keep plugging it in into a white wire, which is not a wire really, it's a piece of sort of appledom. So it's an expensive wire, right, with little fittings on the end, which change every now and then, so you have to replace all of your wires, right, so that you can plug it into your phone, so your phone can be liberated. So the sort of wireless world requires lots of wires. And anyway, the wireless world all passes through these underground cables, these fiber optic cables underneath the ocean, which have an extraordinary capacity for signals, and they can't lay enough of them. So just zooming in a little bit on the ones that we are using right now. Every time you pick up your phone, it actually goes through this stuff. It doesn't go through the air. It goes through these pipes. And these pipes are, you see number 8 is only 1/2 inch. So all the signals are going through that 1/2 inch. All the other layers are just kind of protecting this little flexible core. We're in a kind of a seemingly desperate feedback loop. We want more and more tubes with more and more capacity, occupying more and more of our environment, and yet with less and less visibility. So more and more, but less and less visible. So we're sort of on this heroic, we've set ourselves this challenge, like, let's have more pipes and never see any of them, right? And have them do more than they've ever done before. And we'll all be thinking, we've moved beyond the world of the pipe. We're in the world of the pipeless. Every kind of pipe is now being upgraded, carries more, reaches further, and embarrasses more. So pipes are becoming ever more desirable and ever more embarrassing, right? As with the pipes in our own bodies, pipes in buildings are sites of intense and complicated psychological investments. And perhaps architecture itself might be largely defined by this psychosexual ecology. It might even be that the only role of the architect is to hide the pipes. In fact, if you were to remove from the practice of the architect the act of hiding the pipes, I'm not sure if anything's left. Or at least that's the point of this lecture, to sort of see, what's left after all of that. If you think about it, the basic definition of the interior is now much less to do with walls, doors, and windows, and much more with the countless valves that regulate the flow in all the tubes and all the different orifices through which material is allowed to enter and leave our spaces, the ever-multiplying vents, sockets, diffusers, switches, and control panels, which have become exercises in the detailing of discretion. Right? Remember all the moldings, the traditional moldings, which are to prevent you from seeing any gap between the floor and the wall. It's to remove any sense that the room leaks, that you are emotionally within a single contained world. All of that care is now devoted to making electric sockets and seem like they're not sockets, that they're part of the wall. Extreme attention is devoted to making all the countless perforations in the lining of our spaces seem to be part of the lining rather than threatening openings. So there is this production of a sort of seamless surface behind which lurks this enormous capacity of pipes, but the fact that the pipes are there has to be, as it were, denied, which would make of architecture a kind of professionalization of denial. In other words, what we're really, really good at is denying that there are any pipes there. And again, just to give you something to think about while I'm talking, where is the line between the inside and the outside of your body? Is it your skin, which you know perfectly is full of holes, right? Or is it the big hole at the front end and at the rear end? And by the way, when a piece of food is entering, when does it enter? Does it enter when it goes into your mouth, or when it goes through the walls of your intestines and into the body? Right? Probably, if you're thinking about the interior of the body, the real definition of the gap between the inside and the outside of the body, the wall defining the space of the body, is actually the intestines, which is where you take something from the outside into the inside, right? And it's weird, don't you think, that whole thing? Because, of course, you take something from the outside, you eat it to make yourself. So your interior is made of your exterior. So the intestine is a sort of machine for converting the outside into an inside. That's what your body is sort of like, that's what your body is a kind of transformation of an outside into an inside. And I mean, for me, maybe this is my problem and not yours. I mean, who would have a problem in the new London? But I don't feel myself until I've had a coffee in the morning. I don't. So there's that space between waking up and having the coffee where I'm a bit blurry. Then I drink the coffee, I take something from the outside, goes into the inside, stimulates my inside, and I feel now myself, right? Which raises the interesting question, who the hell drinks the coffee? Because it's not me, right? Because I'm me after I've had the coffee. So in that very sort of simple sense, I drink the outside, I take the outside in, I digest it to become myself. So likewise, if there is this relationship between architecture and our own bodies, which we keep telling people for thousands of years there is, then it will be this interesting way in which stuff moves from the outside to the inside across some kind of membrane, some kind of porous surface, a surface that will be full of holes, all of which will be regarded as astonishingly, enormously embarrassing, right? Let's take Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright writes a book in 1954 called The Natural House. If ever there was a sort of ideological frame, the natural house, I mean, nothing could be less natural. Like, do you really think a tree is saying to you, I just would love to be chopped down and made into wooden pieces so that somebody can walk on me and say, that's such a natural architecture, right? Please murder me now so that I can become architecture, a natural architecture, right? So the natural house, Frank Lloyd Wright notes that when he became an architect at the end of the 19th century, he says bowels, circulation, and nerves, sewerage, water, electricity, he says, were new in buildings, but they had come to stay, like this kind of guest. And a building could no longer remain a mere shell in which life was somehow to make shift as it might. So Frank Lloyd Wright, a very, very, I think, very beautiful writer. But so here are these things, sewerage, water, electricity, have come to stay. They're in the house. The house is no longer a mere shell, but it's kind of a supercharged with this stuff. But then he immediately says, wiring for lights, as with plumbing, pipes for plumbing and heating, should not show all over the house unless by, quote, special design, any more than you would have the organs of your own body on the outside of your skin. Lighting fixtures should, as should all others, be absorbed in the structure so that their office is of the structure. So he says architecture can no longer be without pipes, but the pipes have to be of the structure, not outside, right? They have to be inside the structure itself. Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the very first designers to do his own electrical light fittings. This is a perfect example, I think, of Frank Lloyd Wright. You have a window where you can see to the outside. Then you have electrical light fittings above, which are made to look the same as the ones looking out. You don't see the light bulbs and you don't see the electricity, so that the electricity becomes, as it were, natural, but the light seems to be coming from the architecture itself. So the architecture, as it were, glows. Here's maybe a better example, of course, the famous example of the great columns, and which appear to be like a forest in which the light is coming down naturally. But from this particular angle, you can see the light fittings hiding behind, which you're not supposed to see. The light is supposed to be, as it were, coming from architecture. So I would say that architects are fully aware of the ever larger world of pipes, but also fully aware that their role is to suppress it, big time. Now, no building form is ever as complex as the systems or services that service the activities in the building, right? So even the simplest building, if you say, show me the building, okay, fine. Now show me the systems that support that building. Those systems will be infinitely more complex than the building. We could even suggest that architecture itself is an act of simplification or of veiling complexity. In other words, to veil the pipes would be to veil complexity. Perhaps nothing can be as thin as architecture, which would be the art of suspending perforated surfaces within a myriad of flows to paradoxically represent seamless solidity. So in a world of unbelievable flows and complexity of flows, we suspend these very, very fragile surfaces which deny that there is such flow going on, and paradoxically represent stability. So very, very delicate illusion of stability and security suspended within continuous flow. Now, of course, the place where the oldest form of the pipe surfaces in architecture, and always surfaces, and where the pipes inside the body are most directly connected to the pipes inside the building, is, of course, where the psychosexual drama of the pipe is reaching its kind of glorious maximum. Because to sit on a toilet is to literally sit on a pipe. So there is this issue there. How can you continue to not deny that the pipes are there when you're sitting on one? And of course, the toilet does try to be a little building, like I'm not really on the toilet. The Americans would say I'm going to the bathroom because it's even to mention the toilet would be unacceptable. But then the toilet tries to be like a little piece of architecture. The pipe has obviously widened itself to become a piece of furniture, but it remains unambiguously a pipe. The body literally occupies the pipe, or more precisely, it's suspended within the pipe, hovering in a gap opened up in an otherwise continuous circuit of water flow. So the body is suspended in a space defined only by valves. In other words, there is a valve above you and a valve below you, and if I release the valve above, the water will continue to flow. I can then act as if nothing happened, right? And you know, I don't know. I don't know what you think about when you're on the toilet at the Architectural Association, which is presumably when you're really being an architect. Do you sit there and say to yourself, I wonder if it sort of came out and went past Brett's office and then made a left? Like what just happened? No, you, experts on place, movement, where things are, where things go, organizers, people who orchestrate patterns, it's like it's disappeared. It basically never existed, right? I wash my hands of it. It didn't happen. This is why, of course, the place where this piece of magic happens, where you're the outside that became your inside and is now your outside and is sent out, not just out of the universe, gone, right? Magically. Of course, that's the one room in the AA that probably has the lock on it. Not a lock with a secret password, but a lock usable by anyone, because anyone who is anyone would want to hide that. And not only would you want to hide it, other people would want you to hide it from them too. So it's a kind of an agreement that in that room, let's assume it's a room, nothing happened. It just took a while for nothing to happen. But now, of course, the same is true of all of the equipment in a so-called bathroom. Like when I stand in the shower, I'm inside the pipe. I basically have a pipe which has been broken so that the water can come onto me, flow over me, and then return to the pipe. When I wash my hands, I suspend my body inside the pipe, again, in a space defined by valves. Right? The same with the bath. Everything in the bathroom, which is why, of course, this room is a very special place. This is the room that receives maximum amount of money in contemporary architecture. But it's not just that. The great fear is, of course, that it might return, might overflow, there might be a problem. So the room itself has a vent, above to suck up all of the smell, because of course smell would be criminal evidence of something having happened. So it has to go out. But also there has to be the possibility that all the water in the system would go out the other end. So basically, if you think about it, a bathroom is not a room with a series of pipes that enter it and you can place yourself in the space of those pipes. The whole room is a piece of the pipe, right? It's basically a room is constructed at the intersection of a series of circulating pipes, right? And it's completely sealed up like any pipe. So basically, to make a bathroom, you have to think pipe to make it. So in a world in which pipes are not allowed to enter, there could be a room in the house that's in some senses also outside the house, or is like an airlock. I mean, that's another fantasy, I suppose, people have in the toilet. They've basically gone into sort of an airlock where you push a button and whoosh, right? So that means that's a room that's not in the house, really. It's at the beginning of the end of the house. It's where the house stops, right? Or if you see it the other way around, it's where the house starts. So from this perspective, a house is produced in the bathroom, produced by the throwing away of the knowledge of what has just been thrown away from your body, right? Something like this. So it's a pretty important place from that point of view. The room is the intersection of a series of enlarged pipes. It's not so much a room serviced by pipes as the widening of pipes to form a room. So to enter the bathroom is literally to enter the inside cavities of the building. When I enter the bathroom, I stand in the space of the butler, neither in nor out. I'm in the inside of the inside. And if being on the inside of the inside sounds cooler than just being inside, well, the bathroom is where it's at. You are, as it were, in the lining of the walls of the house in that moment. And of course that would make sense, right? If the whole envelope of the house is defined by a whole series of pipes which are connected to that surface but are hidden, then of course, in fact, the bathroom would be the inside of the walls. So when I enter the bathroom, I've actually gone inside the walls of the house. And that same suspension of the body is presumably always happening simply when there's air conditioning, putting some air into the room and sucking it out the other end. In a space that's defined by valves, filters, diffusers, pumps, sensors, and switches, that's always the case. Whenever air is brought in one vent and blown out another, any room then is part of a pipe or the intersection of a number of pipes. So space has become an effect of an intricate choreography of pipes. So far we're saying, okay, pipes are absolutely not to be acknowledged and cannot enter to the space being the means of hiding the pipes, to the space being actually, secretly, the intersection of the pipes. So basically what I want to deny when I'm in a house is that I'm in the pipe. Precisely what I want is to say I'm not traveling at 30,000 feet, 400 miles an hour. No, wait. That's not what's happening. Something else is happening, like domestic life or something like that. So if you make a drawing of the pipes in a building, that drawing will be, even for a simple building, probably more complex than the drawing of a city. Now, architects are sometimes asked to do cities. It happens. But they're never asked to do anything with pipes. Pipes is serious business. Cities, it's important, but, even architects could do it. And if you think I'm kidding, compare the salaries of plumbers and architects. Right? Architects are always paid. Architects have been known to be paid. Right? One is dealing with something essential, fundamental, the other with something precisely not. Precisely something that maybe isn't needed, something that goes beyond necessity. So the design, fabrication, assembly, monitoring and maintenance of this intense dance of pipes has now become an art form because there are just so many of them, an art form that the architect is not involved in, but the architect is still busy focusing on keeping it all a secret. So we now train an incredibly superior species that is able to hide more pipes than has ever been hidden in the history of architecture in a much more sophisticated way. Pipeless architecture is now simply unthinkable. Anybody who thinks of architecture without pipes is an idiot. And every architect thinks about architecture without pipes. So we are a bunch of idiots. The default organizing fantasy of our discipline is pipeless architecture. Pipes are, as it were, installed in the unconscious of architecture. They are as hidden in architectural education as that they are in buildings. Right? There's a kind of disciplinary hygiene by which the world of pipes is discussed as little as a family discusses what goes on in the bathroom, right? When you present your projects in an architecture school, every now and then you'll be asked something about the structure of your project. The person who asks it really doesn't care too much about the answer, and you don't have a good answer anyway. And in this country, as in many others, you're not allowed to do the structure. And yet the thought that there is something structural about what you do is considered to be fundamental to your discipline. So there's a kind of performance by which you pretend to have an awareness of structure or attitude to it. But you'll never have a professor say, and what's your take on pipes? Or how are you going to move the water through this? Or that won't happen. Even in the most explicitly sustainable, focused, energy, conscious design, it still won't get into what's your kind of philosophy of flow, like what are you doing with flow? When you're asked about structure, you don't say, well, structure is just structure. No, you say, oh, structure. Now, my point of view is this. But when it's in the world of energy and flow in that sense, you definitely start to defer to science. Now, of course, this ever-expanding, repressed world of pipes always has its leaks, blockages, and occasional overflows, like any other system of pipes. The building and the discipline sometimes get covered with what they want to exclude, and no repression is ever complete. Pipes sometimes themselves burst into architectural discourse with designers eagerly embracing them, right? So this is what I would. These are, let's say, sucking the liquids down and sucking the smells up. These are, as it were, the real dimensions on the floor and on the ceiling. This architecture occurs between these two fittings, both of which are a surface turning into a pipe, or you could say a pipe pretending to be a surface, so that when you can line them all up, it's as if the pipe doesn't exist. But of course, one of the great pipey moments was Michael Webb's student project, 1957-58, for the furniture factory, which of course was the scene of Nicholas Pevsner's denunciation of this so-called Bauerlist project. Rainer Banham actually becoming interested in Michael Webb because of his teacher's discouraging comments about this project. So setting in motion even a kind of mythology about archigram. And if you look at the project, it's really pipes. I mean, it's not just a building covered with pipes. It's a building in which spaces are expansions of pipes. And then, of course, you could take Pompidou. But here the exposed pipe is already in some new kind of dress, right? It's not wearing very much, just a veneer of bright color or more precisely aligned rivets or designer gaskets. But this really sexy outfit that has claimed the pipe for architecture in this project remains a veil. The same pipe becomes something else when it slithers back inside the building, outside of the control of the architect, and back to the care of other experts. In other words, the dirty secret remains. Let's try to figure this one out. And we're going to use this guy as our assistant. Imagine him in a sort of sexy, spangly outfit, the assistant, like he's just going to appear. What's going on here? The real crime of the pipes is their own fluidity. It's not the fluids in the pipes, but the fluidity of the pipe itself. The tubes that are crucial in sustaining and even making possible the spatial logic that is installed by the architect relentlessly violate that logic. They exceed the law that they maintain. They're a kind of excess. They're a kind of restless promiscuity that must be veiled. Pipes are like a nest of snakes slithering around in the crevices of the building, entering and leaving unobserved, uncontrolled, unmonitored, and connecting the building to other buildings around it through ever larger pipes that reach into the distance, gathering ever more built and social fabric together and ultimately super-subordinating the work of the architect. Architecture, when you think of pipes, is just a small fitting attached to a world of pipes. You don't build architecture on the ground, you build it in a set of pipes. And by the way, the ground is full of pipes monitoring itself and so on. The pipes in the house are part of one enormous interior. Imagine, for example, when you turn on the tap and water comes out, if you put your finger inside the tap and you can feel the moisture after you've turned it off, in theory, if you could make your finger small enough, you could follow the surface of the pipes all the way back to the river or lake where the water came from. In other words, the way those systems work is it's one enormous interior, in the same way that your lungs are relatively small, but there's vast amounts of surface in them. So if you think you're so fancy as an architect making your space, that space has to be serviced by pipes which are themselves infinitely more complex, infinitely more dramatic, enormous works of art, these systems are, and they are interiors. So your interior becomes just a little interior attached onto this enormous thing. Of course architects don't want to know about the world of pipes, because the world of pipes is a world, and the building is just a little fitting. It's not that the house is an interior serviced by pipes. The house is just a fitting, a valve attached to a colossal interior space. So the space is already there. The space you occupy, which is the space of the flow within the pipes, that space is already there. All the architect does is put a little decoration on it. In exactly the same way that the faucet has its designer quality, the house itself has that quality. Now, no figure more captures this sort of psychosexual and political enigma of pipes, I think, than Buckminster Fuller. Why? Because he wanted everything exposed. He worshipped mechanical services. He loved them. He thought of buildings as being valves. That was his word for a building. It was a valve modifying the relationship between inside and outside. He hated plumbers. More than anybody in the universe, he hated plumbers. He was sued by plumbers and he sued plumbers, and he wrote essays against them. He hated the idea of pipes connecting buildings to each other. For him, it's just horrible, the thought that one building would be connected to another by a pipe. And he dreamed about a pipeless world. Right? So this is a man in love with pipes, absolutely in love with pipes, but hates the idea of pipes connected to other pipes. Right? My pipe, not your pipe, right, would be his thing. His whole project is, of course, about the elimination of waste, right? To do the most for the least. No waste. So he's a kind of waste disposal unit for the discipline, understood as a form of mental hygiene. Cleaning the body, cleaning the air, and cleaning the mind were inseparable for Fuller. And his designs were always organized around a concentrated core of flow management, right? So, for example, here we are in 1927. By the way, there may be no other architect photographed more often and in more different poses with models than Bucky Fuller. In front of them, inside them, above them, alongside, you name it. A kind of tradition. I mean, Fuller is not imaginable without his models. His models are like part of his body. His relationship to them, as you can see here, starts off very protective. He's wearing a suit. By the way, he's wearing the suit because he did a study. He wanted to be himself inconspicuous. And he studied every profession and found that bank clerks were the single least noticed people in the universe. And why? Because they wore these kind of three-piece suits and so on. So he deliberately adopted the costume to be invisible. So here he is standing invisibly, carefully indicating his model. But the Dymaxion house you see at the middle has an aluminium tube, which is for the circulation of light, heat, cooling, water, waste, electricity, air, and people. Right? And then the house is hung from this tube. So basically the house is a pipe, and hanging off the pipe is what you would think of as the spaces, and the pipe is then buried in a tank, a cylinder, which has sewage, oil, and gas, all of which are independent of any other house. You know how, of course, you put the house in the ground as you have a zeppelin, you see a place that you like, you drop some dynamite, makes a hole, you drop the house into it, put a little concrete, you plant it like a tree. So it's a pipe, it's a house organized around a pipe. It's a house hanging from a pipe. This is not the problem of like, will I let the pipes in? This is like, let's attach the house to the pipes. But of course then Fuller stages an escape from the world of the pipe. What he wants you to do is to deal with all the fluids and so on in the central core so that you can then connect to the world by radio. So you would not be connected to your next door neighbor by a pipe, but you would be connected to a house on the other side of a planet by radio. And he imagines a centralized radio television room at the top. For Fuller, the whole trajectory of society is to go from the wire to the wireless, from the pipe to the pipeless. And from pipe to pipeless is one of his slogans. Here's the Dymaxion house as it gets perfected, and you will notice there's always the bathroom at the very center. So there's a system of flow management, and then the bathrooms cling to that, and then the house clings to the bathrooms. So basically a big pipe connected to the little pipes of the bathroom connected to the house, and in the house you have no divisions, no floors, you're in a completely plastic environment. Here you can see the two bathrooms attaching themselves to the core. In his 1938 book, 9 Chains to the Moon, Fuller argues that bad plumbing, whether it be in the house or in the human body, is the main reason for the invention of psychology and psychoanalysis. Right? No bad plumbing, no need to take care of anything. And he said improved plumbing and attention to what he called intestinal habits is the beginning of scientific dwelling. And his whole book begins by contrasting congestion in arterial hookups, he means traffic jams, to the magical ability of radio to jump anywhere in the world. So radio is his sort of paradigm of the architecture of the future. Radio is the model for a new shelter industry disconnected from any system of pipes which is connected to the land. So for example, Fuller says that a highway is a pipe and your car is a piece of the pipe that you're carrying with you. So you're going up and down a tube. For Fuller, the real problem with pipes is that they are lines, that pipes go from A to B. It's a constraining of movement to a path. He wants to go from a world of lines to open, directionless, four-dimensional space, a kind of omnidirectional space. So this is his history of civilization. We start off in isolated villages. Then we start to network ourselves with highways, ships, and so on. But the real future after the Second World War is to occupy the atmosphere of the Earth in which everybody could move anywhere, any time. Of course, the image being also an image of the kind of electromagnetic world. His model for architecture is that of a ship which is in ever shifting flows of air, water, and information. If you look inside a ship, it's full of plumbing. It has all the systems you need to survive, but it is itself in the water and in the air and in the world of information. So what happened is that he thought that you should take the whole expanded world of plumbing and compact it into very, very compact, the smallest possible self-sustaining units to free buildings and people to navigate within flow itself. His model was, of course, the space program. And he becomes obsessed with the fact that in order to have these two guys live in outer space, you're going to have to build for him what he calls a little house, the most important house that's ever been built. Plumbing, he says, in the face of the space program, has to evolve for the first time in thousands of years. There's a little black box in this spacecraft which takes care of all sanitation, information, fluids, oxygen, and so on. And he says that little box could become the model for architecture on Earth, since after all the little houses on Earth are little spaceships, and we are all, as it were, astronauts. In 1963, he goes to the conference of the International Union of Architects, the UIA, and says the problem with architects is that they never look beneath the green bathroom tiles. This was always his criticism of the Bauhaus, that they made beautiful bathroom tiles, but they never lifted them up to see what was behind. And he notes that no architect was involved in NASA's space program, and that this was a huge indictment of the field. And he said, but they should be. And instantly, his friends and colleagues, in this case John McHale, start publishing Spacecraft as the models for architecture. And you see the image below, published by Robert Middleton, is somebody in their spacesuit connected to a system of planning and this plumbing. And this autonomous system is the real model for architecture. And this is not understood to be architecture in its most advanced technical condition. This is understood to be the primitive hut, the most basic possible definition, something very well understood here at the AA with this cover from 1966 comparing literally the spacecraft to the primitive hut. Fuller will insist that the most fundamental need for architecture is sanitation. It's not exotic, it's the least exotic thing that you have to do. Of course, very quickly, it's the spacesuit and the portable life support pack on your back that becomes the model for architecture, because then in this system of plumbing, of course there's plumbing inside your body connected to plumbing inside the pack. Every pipe in your body is connected to a set of pipes here, and architecture has become just a dotted line. Yes, there's a kind of box, a kind of white plastic box in which all of this is contained. That's what's left of architecture. And he loves the fact that architecture has been reduced to this box. For once, there's no building in the way, just the spacesuit with its 6 sockets for the umbilical cords. And of course, the spacesuit itself is full of liquid. It is itself a kind of air-conditioned environment. In 1969, Fuller starts saying that this little black box, this kind of backpack, should be mass-produced for all the astronauts on Earth. In other words, a house would be just one of those packs plus an envelope, a very, very thin plastic envelope. So what's going on with Fuller is all the pipes buried in very heavy buildings now give way to portable life support packs in the lightest possible domes that in turn give way to invisible architecture. And Fuller very much understood his own work as a space program. This is his first dome, 1949, and you see him inside it wearing it so happy. It's not a metal frame to which plastic has been added. It's a plastic dome supported by a metal frame. What matters is the plastic evolves into the Skybreak House of 1952, exhibited in the Museum of Modern Art, evolves to the Homestyle House, 1957. It's the same project, same idea, evolves to Manhattan Dome, 1959, same idea, same project. Right? It is a one-project architect. By the way, an architect with one idea, it's more ideas than we usually get. So one is good. And in this case, it's 2 miles in diameter, 1 mile high, housing 3 million people. The secret of this project is they're not housed below, but inside the dome itself, inside the lining of the dome. So architecture, as it were, goes into the plastic surface of the dome. Fuller stopped 1929. He was busy trying to sell his Dymaxion house, and he decided that actually, since the house was organized around the bathroom, that to really be serious about what he was doing, he should only be designing a bathroom. So he became a consultant with the American Sanitary Manufacturing Company from 1930 to 32, designing an autonomous bathroom. This is a bathroom in which nothing leaves. Right? Imagine the fantasy before, which is you go to the bathroom and it's just gone. This is a bathroom in which you go into the bathroom and nothing left. Right? Deal with it. And of course what happened is that the plumbers union attacked him and stopped the project. But he didn't give up, because of somebody with one idea. You can't give up. So he did it again, 1935 to 38. He developed this Dymaxion bathroom, which is a room, but there's no distinction between the room and the pipe, between architecture and fittings. In this space, the toilet, the bath, shower, sink, soap holders, shelves, step, floor, ceiling, sidewalls, mirror, lighting, ventilation, and entry are all part of one continuous folded surface, which could be in metal or plastic. It's a circuit, the circuit of material. Nothing coming out of the body would leave this room, would leave the house. Solid waste was conveniently, which he described as valuable chemistry, was wrapped in plastic automatically. So plastic, you're inside a plastic bubble, in which there is a plastic bathroom in which the inside of your body can be wrapped in plastic. So you're basically suspended in a series of layers of plastic. Seamless. No division between inside and outside. In a way, the most extreme statement of a fluidity between inside and outside coming from modern architecture, but able to be inserted into a traditional house easily, right? Bucky Fuller used to travel around with a trailer behind his car with one of these bathrooms on it, kind of trying to get people to buy it. He successfully in 1939 had one of them exhibited in the Museum of Modern Art as a work of art. And of course it became the centerpiece of when he returned again to the question of housing in the 1946 Wichita version, the Dymaxion house, and you see two of those bathroom units once again form the core of this system. What he insists is that in the design of the Dymaxion bathroom, there are no cracks or crevices where bacteria could linger. He was super obsessed with bacteria. He proposed that there would be a fog gun which would clean the bathroom but also clean your body. And in fact, he studied the dirt in architecture students. So this is the dirt in the bodies of architecture students in Chicago under the microscope. And what Fuller argued about the dirt in the body of his students was that the dirt had become so ingrained and entwined with the skin cells, he said, like coral reef, that the only way to deal with it is to sort of blast it out with this fog gun. And you have to, he studied every kind of dirt in Chicago. He made a dirt analysis. He was so obsessed with cleanliness that he would have his students and assistants clean the toilets in a space before he would use the space, like in a school. And the sign that they had done a fantastic job with a toothbrush, etc., was that he didn't say anything. So the extreme cleanliness was the starting point, not the end point for his work. But also something to consider, when he moved into the Dome House in 1960 with his wife Anne, just the two of them, not very often, he was only there once a year, the man whose philosophy is to do the most with the least, you may want to consider why it is that there were two bathrooms in such a house, when surely the world's most efficient bathroom, designed by the man who does the most with the least, and in fact he didn't want to use the same bathroom as his wife. And you see the scene. So you are now in the world of the Dome, you're in modernity, funnily not a room so dissimilar to the one you're in now, painted white, with two discrete doors, very close to the bed, minimum distance between what's hidden and what's revealed. This is the world of Fuller. For him, by the way, the whole house was a potential threat. Remember, in 1928, the Dymaxion house cleaned itself every 6 minutes. evicted all the bad air. There were no doorknobs in the house because he felt that they were the most efficient communicators of bacteria. And these are not matters of detail. The whole project for the Dymaxion house is about cleanliness. You see him looking down here, it's as if he's not looking really at the model of his house, but at the man cleaning below or the woman cleaning the dishes. But you will notice that there is a naked woman. In fact, in the first model, there were 3 of them. In the Dymaxion model, the reason she's naked is, of course, to show that you don't need clothes in this environment because it's so perfectly adjusted to your own temperature, but also that you are so clean. There is nothing to be hidden. This is a kind of Garden of Eden image, and Garden of Eden was always his model of what architecture could be producing. And these are not matters of detail because he felt that the purpose of the Dymaxion house was to be a form of preventative pathology against diseases bred by housing. He was convinced that his first daughter had died due to the lack of cleanliness of his apartment in New York. So he believed that architecture was a killer, and that therefore a good architecture would be addressing that. And what I'm interested in is, of course, what is the relationship between this acute fear of invisible microbes and his equally acute desire for architecture to dematerialize into the invisible world? Like, what is the relationship between the bathroom and radio, is my one question to you. Because for Fuller, all hygiene was fundamentally and ultimately mental hygiene. The bathroom is for him even the crucial instrument for thought. Just to quote Fuller, a bathroom isn't just a piece of machinery, it is intimate to the fundamental routine of cleanliness, morality, and clean thinking. The ability to cope with filth, bread, fungi, bacteria, and their ravaging through sanitary waste disposal and ready-to-hand soap and running water has many subconsciously important relationships to the scheduled inauguration of the progressive cerebral capabilities of the new life, which means clean body, new brain. Not just clean brain, but brain itself. In fact, the bathroom for Fuller is part of the brain. Right? It's not that you clean yourself and then you can think, or that you go into the bathroom and you think. That thought itself is a product of the bathroom. The bathroom contributes to the unique growth of the individual mind. In this sense, a bathroom could never be shared. It is linked to what Fuller called the most basic need for autonomy in the young, evolving brain. It's not by chance that Fuller associates the inability to tolerate or incubate original thought with his first day at school, which he remembers as arriving in a classroom and seeing all the desks lined up and immediately having the sense that everybody was supposed to say the same thing, and the desks revealing that. And being terrified by that, he went to the bathrooms and describes what he calls the horrid smell of the urine of his classmates. So the absence of private bathroom coincides with the absence for him of original thought and of the autonomous mind. The autonomous mind is sheltered by the autonomous bathroom. Private bathrooms are more important for education than schools. I mean, no joke. He was invited to Caracas in 1940 to address the education system, and he argued they should do nothing with the schools, but they should put private bathrooms in the slums. And he argued that if they put private bathrooms in the slums, the average IQ would quickly rise more than 50%. Right? In a 1942 essay, Fuller had noted that the words sane and sanitary come from the same root. He said the degree of probability of preservation of inherent sanity in the individual is proportional to the degree of maintenance of inherent sanitation in the environment. Right? So, sanitation, sane. But he totally rejects, and maybe when I say totally, we should be on our guard. Anything totally rejected implies some issues. He rejects the transformation of essential sanitary functions into puritanical thinking. He notes that almost all the religions of the world obsess about and base themselves around rituals of cleanliness. He says it has nothing to do with that. He says hygiene is just basically a fundamental survival function that has to be scientifically revolutionized. His goal was quickness in sanitation. Translation, the amount of time you spend in the bathroom is very short because you have prepared the body for this transcendental moment. In his case, by what he called the Dymaxion diet, which was prunes, cold tea, and raw steak. And I just show you him on the tea phase of this diet. He monitored and noted every detail of his own body. He was dedicated to cleaning his every pipe and every pore. After all, his desire to disconnect from the collective pipes in the ground was also about the fear of contagion by others. What he loved about the Dymaxion bathroom is you couldn't have something backing up in that bathroom from your neighbor's bathroom, which was a strong image for him. The pipeless world for Fuller is ultimately a world of hygiene. And this cleaning, I think, is not about suppressing the body's chemistries. On the contrary, it's a kind of embrace of the normally hidden solids, liquids, and gases. The hyperextension of the mind is seen to be literally liberated by exposing all the fluids of the circuit and keeping them close. And I mean really literally. Fuller used to lecture for around a minimum, what he called a mini lecture was 5 hours, and he did not like to stop. So early in his life, he would urinate inside his trousers during the lecture rather than interrupt the stream of his thought. Later, when he became obsessed with NASA, he borrowed their equipment so that he could, as it were, urinate in full flight. His daughter remembers the look on his face when he would be urinating surrounded by hundreds of people, and he would sort of look up, and she said she knew perfectly what he was doing, but the room was always convinced that this was the moment of a sort of transcendental and of course, in a certain way, that's true, right? Because if he's arguing that the bathroom is part of the brain and is even the possibility of the brain, having something attached to you so close is, of course, the most portable of bathrooms. Like the distance between bathroom and brain is minimized in this moment. And this is much more than the modern architect's generic association of the aesthetics of cleanliness with health and with the purification of thought, like as exemplified by Le Corbusier on the cleansing power of the white wall. With Fuller, we're talking about a full-on fixation with its own array of super-compulsive habits and probably displaced intellectual and aesthetic effects. So just getting back to Le Corbusier, this is his own sink in his own apartment in which the pipes are allowed to play. And of course he brings the sanitary fittings into his arguments, and even they become the thing that you encounter when you enter the building. And of course there's a relationship between the whiteness of the sanitary fittings and the whiteness of the house itself. And it's true that Le Corbusier, more than most architects, at least points out that there are all these pipes in this famous drawing with the telephone, the gas, and water and so on. But notice that the way architecture works in this drawing is to actually disassociate the eye of the person in their apartment, and the person being an eye on legs, is disconnected from all the pipes. So architecture is a kind of distancing from the world of pipes. Fuller, on the other hand, unleashed the world of pipes. In one more twist, and I suppose in the psychosexual dramas that's always about the twist, the pipeless architect, Fuller, became the patron saint of piped architecture. So the person who was trying to do the most to constrain the pipes the most became the god of an armada of pipes that were launched in the late 60s and 70s by a generation, all of whom were explicitly inspired by Fuller's transformation of mechanical services from embarrassing secret into central fetish. Again, everything was pipes and plumbings. Everything was umbilical. The countercultural experiments of the so-called radicals were filled with tubes, often being all tube, expanding spacesuits into flexing rooms and compacting houses into mobile space capsules with all the pulsating veins showing. Naked architects inside their bubbles, no more or less naked than the woman naked in the Bucky Fuller house of 28, for exactly the same reason. Heartbeats generating environments. The Villa Rosa of Carl Pimmelblau starts off as a suitcase in the shape of a space helmet that gradually inflates into a house. You can see the architects themselves wearing their space helmet. It gets to be this big. So here they are alongside the Villa Rosa wearing their helmets, one of them somehow able to breathe oxygen. Actually, it's not clear that architects get on well with oxygen. If you look at architecture students, they tend to smoke within half a meter of the front of the building before disappearing in. Human beings can actually venture deeper into the oxygen-rich environment. But here they are. This is the architect of that moment. So even to be an architect was to be some kind of astronaut. and not just one, all of them, right? House Rococo, again, connected in space umbilically to their house. The difference with House Rococo, now the plumbing has become part of the surface, and it's not in the fuller sense a little plumbing package inside a bubble. The bubble itself actually has the plumbing embedded in its side, as can be seen when it's hanging over Vienna, or when the very same thing is turned up to become another project in the middle of nowhere. Or David Green, of course, being a magnificent example of taking seriously Fuller's idea of the autonomous house as spaceship, and having all the plumbing and equipment on the outside with big umbilical cords that simply connect into the interior whenever they are needed, and all the equipment in this kind of fleshy way. Or maybe the best example of all, the Souterloon of Michael Webb, where now the only evidence of architecture becomes the sort of tattooed pattern of the plumbing, which literally creates the architecture, creates the space for the naked body to occupy. And here the body really being the bubble of plastic and its kind of organic systems, its intestinal systems. Or, you know, to say the obvious, a world in which if you're outside the pipe, you die. Or just to concentrate on the principle at the heart of Plug-in City, a series of pipes with mouths and so on, to which architecture is attached, architecture being attached to the pipe. Or, of course, its more successful public version. But here you can see the pipe is very much on the outside of the building, and if you look at it, it comes up one side of the building and then across the roof. There is still, as it were, a building being serviced by the pipe. So we have gone very, very quickly, in the space of around 10 years, we have gone from being inside the pipe, occupying the pipe, being part of the pipe, to the pipe again as kind of glamorous servant. The so-called high-tech architects were celebrating pipes, but pipes to look at rather than to be inside. The radical gesture of living inside the pipe has given way to a more traditional idea of a space served by pipes, a kind of domestication of pipe through hyper-controlled exposure. Like, I'm not afraid of the pipe. No, really, I'm not. I'm not. No, I'm not afraid of the pipe. No. To which you feel like saying, but I never suggested that you were. But I'm not afraid. I'm not. If you were to, I would tell you, I'm certainly not afraid of the pipe. Look how many pipes I have. Now, this domestication of the pipe through a kind of controlled, hyper-controlled exposure was already implied in the Delagray drawing for the Rayner Banham 1965 essay, A House is Not a Home, in which, of course, not by accident, we meet Rayner Banham's naked body, or at least we meet his head on Delagray's body, as shown in the beautiful exhibition and book that was done here at the AA. Just to give you the sense, that's the body, and this is the historian, attached, his head now attached sort of cybernetically to the lean figure of the French architect, a kind of sloppy English historian now disguised in the sleek French model. But happily together, I mean really together, in an image that will never run out of interest or intrigue, 3 on one side, 2 on the other. I mean, what are they exactly up for? Not for each other, right? The real encounter was with the object in the middle. The real sex here is with electronics. The clothes have been removed and replaced by the pneumatic bubble in order to stage the encounter with radio, right, with information. But not just information. This is Delagray's drawing of what Banham calls the intestinal complexity of the house. And look at this. Delagray has made the plumbing into a kind of flower, a kind of sculptural flower for fumes, air conditioning, waste, water, power, radio, television, and music. This, I think, is a total reversal of this project of Yves Klein and Claude Perrant from 1961 for Air-Conditioned City. Here again, a naked couple sits in the Garden of Eden that's made possible by this enormous amount of buried plumbing, which only appears slightly hidden amongst the trees. So these are almost, let's say, inverse projects. Here, all the plumbing is to be seen. Here it disappears. This kind of reversal, in the unhouse of Delagray, pipeless architecture would now be emphatically, visibly, and elegantly piped. The world of radio, the world of the invisible, would be a world in which you would be accompanied by highly visible but highly tamed, domesticated, and well-behaved, elegant pipes. At the other end of the scale, in exactly the same year, Louis Kahn's medical research labs, same year as Banham's article, put all the elevators, exhaust, intake vents, cables, and pipes in monumental shafts on the outside of the building, with the labs themselves sheathed in glass. So this is the same project, but now the labs are in glass rather than plastic and are covered on the outside with all of these pipes. So you would think that at this moment, the pipe is no longer forbidden, no longer the space of unmentionable flows, noises, chemicals, and waste. But Kahn had been already very, very clear that the opposite was the case. He says, I do not like ducts. I do not like pipes. I hate them very thoroughly. But I hate them so thoroughly that I feel like they have to be given their place. If I just hated them and took no care, I think they would invade the building and completely destroy them. So what you're looking at is not a celebration of the pipe, but an eviction of the pipe and a containment and rejection of the pipe. And I would say if I can generalize, half a century later, exactly half a century later, the psychodrama of the pipe in architecture is fully intact in all of its contradictory force. The dream of pipeless architecture is still the dominant fantasy of architects. Most people are pretending that pipes don't exist, or they're doing the opposite, turning pipes into architecture. But either way, architecture is deeply threatened by the system of flow that makes it possible. Architects might have a certain pride that their buildings can leak. In fact, most architects think that's the evidence that there was an architect, that it does leak. That pushing the envelope literally sometimes lets a little bit of the outside in, but the permanent leaking from the hidden inside to the inside of the inside is simply unmentionable. The architect is increasingly enveloped by pipes, no doubt about it, and sensitive to the complex flows within even the simplest structure, but the allure of the pipeless dream has only become stronger as pipes have bred more and more. Flows of air, flows of people, of goods, of materials, of energy, of information, of images, of techniques, of carbon, and of capital are all basic to the definition of space and are part of the vocabulary of most architects, but liquidity itself remains fundamentally troubling to the discipline and its core sense of what a building is. The whole point of architecture remains to suspend the sense of liquidity, to deny, a disavowal, a structural disavowal. The subject is almost too sensitive, too important to talk about. It's as if every label already is understood to carry the architect's permanent, unspoken, and wishful label, this is not a pipe. Right? So we basically spend all of our time preparing the statement, this is not a pipe. The surfaces of buildings are suspended within flows to repress flow, and that's our art. That's the art of the architect. And the AA has been implicated all along, deeply. This is a dome in the courtyard of the AA here, built under the supervision of Cedric Price in the year of his graduation in 1956, and then represented on the cover on the left of the journal of the school. Then you have the Spacecraft and the rustic hut 10 years later. Then you have Bucky Fuller as the ghost dancer of the year in 1974, interviewed at a moment in which he believes he has spoken to 1% of all living humanity. And he's asked to give his sort of, as it were, final thoughts. So just a last thought then, returning to Bucky's bathroom and to his naked rear end. Because this is Fuller himself, 1938, very clean, presumably cleansed by the very pipe in which he's resting, warm probably because it's photographed by F.S. Lincoln, one of the great architectural photographers, so it would have taken a long time, a lot of lights, lying on the metal, warmed up by the lights, confidently going where Banham fears to tread, presenting himself with his rear end, shapely, no doubt, his hands languid. He lies in wait for us, presumably, desperately hoping we will enter the inside of the inside, a kind of image for you to think about, an image about which I have nothing important to say, but just to show you that it exists. And maybe you have some thoughts. That's it for me. I would like to end on same degree of stupidity that I started, that we don't know really what it is to be in this room, so we cannot know what it is for him to be in that room, and probably we would have to really hesitate to use the word room about this Dymaxion bath room that we have entered with the camera from on high, outside, looking down, in the same way that he looked down at the naked woman in the Dymaxion house that he's presenting. So I now look down on the image looking down, presenting to you. I don't think we know anything about this economy. But if we were to listen to Fuller, if you were to listen to Fuller rather than me, which I would advise, you are looking at the inside of the inside of the inside of the production of the brain. So you are looking at thought. You're looking at a machine for thinking. Fuller lectured on average 3 times a week to audiences that averaged around 1,000. Average length was around 5 hours. He spoke so many 100 words per minute. He believed he was the fastest speaker. There may never have been so many words delivered by one person in architecture to make the point that we should do the most with the least. He used the most amount of words to say that we should do the least. But it's possible that this image is, as it were, the epicenter of this. So I would just like you to really deeply contemplate Bucky Fuller's rear end as the beginning and the end of our field. Thank you.
Are there questions?
I think it's fine to have no questions. But maybe I don't know about you, but I'm going to have a drink. Right? I just want you to think about. That. I'm still going. I'm now in the big intestine. Think about that next time you draw that as your project. I guess that's the. It was nice to be here.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much indeed.